I am delighted this evening to announce my special guest, a very special guest, a person who has been an inspiration to me, a mentor to me, and a dear friend. I am speaking of the best boss anybody could ever ask for. The former governor of the great state of Alaska and the 2008 vice presidential nominee for the Republican Party, Governor Sarah Palin. Governor Palin, I want to welcome you to Breitbart News Tonight, your first time on this program, but I hope it won't be your last time.
Thank you so much, Rebecca. It's a pleasure. And, I hope your listeners know that everything complimentary you just said, it's mutual. You are an amazing, amazing American. And I'm so glad you're there having your voice heard for America.
Well, Governor, you have been an inspiration to me in making my voice heard and in showing how the ordinary citizens in this country can have a role in politics, can take a stand. And you've been an inspiration, I know, for many people who, from the grassroots level, who have risen up in politics and who have, many of them are in Congress today because of that inspiration. Many of them are in Congress because you helped them get there. Tonight it seems like this is a very difficult news day. There's lots of breaking stories, and I'm going to get everyone's take on what's going on tonight. But right off the bat, Governor, I'd love to get your take on the tragedy that happened this week in Parkland, Florida, with this school shooting. Now, I know this is something that's hard for you, and I know that you have a stance on the Second Amendment, like I do, and like many of our listeners do. And it's difficult to see the attacks on that constitutional right. And it's also tragic to see our country just being ripped apart again by something like this. What are your thoughts on this?
Well, that's a great point. Our country is ripped apart after tragedies like this because too often the angle that's taken in discussion of the tragedy is politicking. And, the country is reeling after this tragedy. It's just horrendous, and it's not inexplicable, though, Rebecca. And it's not a Second Amendment gun issue at all. What needs to be discussed is the failure of the FBI. This kid who murdered all these innocent people could not have waved more red flags in front of law enforcement's face. All those things that he did with his posts, with his threats, with wasn't a law enforcement called 39 times in the last number of years at his family's home. There were so many red flags, and it's, I'm embarrassed for the FBI because, the rank and file guys in there, and gals, they work so hard. It's the top brass. It's a matter of priorities in the FBI. And that's where I think the discussion needs to go.
I totally agree. It was shocking today to learn that this 39 times they had gone to this killer's home since at least 2010. It's being reported, and the sheriff said at least 20 times in the last couple of years, which is even more shocking. And then, Governor, we've got news today. We had the story of the YouTube comment, and I'll just remind our listeners about this. We had a figure who we're learning now he was a bail bondsman of all things from Mississippi, who told reporters that he took a screenshot of a comment on his YouTube page, saying the comment was, "I'm going to be a professional school shooter." And this was made last fall. And he flagged this on YouTube. And then he in turn went to tried to contact the local FBI on their email tip line. And I guess it bounced back. And so this guy went the extra mile. And he actually went and contacted the FBI directly, called them up, their local office, and left a voicemail. And then he was interviewed the next couple of days. But then nothing happened about it. Now, this YouTube user's, his name was, the comment was under the name Nicholas Cruz, and which is the name of the killer in Florida. But the FBI said that the agent in charge in Florida said that they couldn't follow up that tip. He said, and here's a quote, "There was no particular information about that particular name, location, or further identifiers about the person who posted the comment." So no additional information was found to positively identify the person who posted this comment, and there was no connection found to South Florida. Excuse me? I don't understand this because let's just be clear here. If they were just to search on other social media sites, they would have immediately pulled up comments of a similar nature. Immediately. Not only, and they would have linked to these comments. They were under his own name. And they were not comments that were that were subtle. I mean, they were things like, I want to shoot people with my AR-15. I want to die fighting, killing a blank ton of people. And these comments were posted all over social media, which is simple to find. And in fact, the internet sites, the 4chan guys, the Reddit guys, all that, they found them instantly. So the FBI couldn't find these. And then, Governor, we've got the FBI. Just keep in mind, all of these comments, they're attached to to a person's internet connection. I mean, this is not rocket science. They were able, during the Gamergate thing, as our Breitbart Tech vertical reported, they were able to find anonymous posters who made comments and track them down to real people. This guy put it under his name. So there was that YouTube comment, and then today, this is just even more astonishing. They actually got a call from somebody who was, quote, close to the shooter. And this person contacted the FBI to leave them a tip. And they basically said that they gave the man's name, the shooter's name, said that he was a gun owner, that he desired to kill people, that he had erratic behavior, that he had disturbing social media posts, and that he was possibly going to target a school for shooting. Mm. And this was done 6 weeks ago in January, 6 weeks ago. And the FBI, the statement from the FBI director, Christopher Wray, today was that they dropped the ball. They didn't follow up on that tip. And it didn't make it to the Miami office somehow. And so, I mean, this is such a failure. There are 17 people dead that could have been prevented. I mean, it's just, and Governor Rick Scott of Florida, which is a great, good man I know that your PAC, Sarah PAC, has supported him when he first ran, and they've supported him ever since. Governor Rick Scott today called for Christopher Wray, the FBI director, to step down, to resign. And here's a statement he gave. He said, "We constantly promote see something, say something. And a courageous person did just that to the FBI, and the FBI failed to act." So, I mean, Governor, where does the buck stop in this?
Well, the governor of Florida did the right thing. I think in calling for the resignation. Bureaucrats and politicians, they are always preaching that rhetoric. If you see something, then say something. Well, obviously, people saw something, they said something, and nothing happened. And 17 people are dead now. It really creates an environment of distrust of our government, unfortunately. We want to be able to trust that what our government's priorities are right. And hopefully, Rebecca, will talk about what the FBI's priorities have been.
Oh, yeah. Let's talk about that. Yeah. Governor, let's talk about what the priorities. It couldn't have happened on a more interesting day, that this terrible news about how they're dropping the ball on this comes the same day that the Mueller investigation, there's a news of the indictment of 13 Russians. Now, okay, before we even start, I mean, Governor, I know that you agree with me. It's a bad thing that the Russians were clearly involved, and this was like a pretty sophisticated, thing that was going on since 2014. They started this, is what we're reading. Since 2014, this operation. And basically what happened today is just special counsel Robert Mueller, he got his indictment against 13 Russian nationals for, quote, violating U.S. criminal laws in order to interfere with U.S. elections and political processes. And basically the group that did this, they're alleged to have spent years, going back to 2014, building a social media following of hundreds of thousands of people, and that we're playing off existing divisions in our politics, and divisions and sympathies in American political landscape, you could say. And when 2016 rolled around, the groups of operatives were alleged to have disparaged Hillary Clinton and Ted Cruz and Marco Rubio, and then used their influence to try to help Donald Trump and Bernie Sanders. And apparently what this was all about was, again, just sowing divisions. It was not necessarily pro one side or the other. It was about wreaking havoc. I mean, they started to support certain groups, like I guess there was a Muslim organization that they supported to try to wreak havoc. There was a Black Lives Matter. They started to funnel, funds, I guess, to them or influence them. And then, but here's the kicker. Deputy Attorney General Rod Rosenstein, who oversees the Mueller investigation, said, and I quote, "There is no allegation in this indictment that any American was a knowing participant in this illegal activity. There is no allegation in the indictment that the charged conduct altered the election." Okay? So altered the outcome of the 2016 election. So in other words, it didn't really have any effect on the election, and no American wittingly actually tried to collude with these guys. These guys were just like, internet trolls. And he even explained that the alleged conspiracy is not simply as supporting one candidate against another, because the conspirators are alleged to have held rallies for and against President-elect Donald Trump in November of 2016. So it was like they were doing the pros and the cons. They were just wreaking havoc. Governor, when I heard this, and I know you'll love this because I know that you're a fan of Al Rushbo, of Rush Limbaugh. This reminded me so much of, it's like the Kremlin's version of Operation Chaos from 2008. Remember that?
Yes.
It's like, what did you make of this? I mean, what did you make of all of this?
Right. Well, I think that they're just create chaos because ultimately that would strengthen their own interests and Russia's interests if America's politics really could get any more chaotic than they already are. And I believe that was their goal. You know what's going to happen is citizen journalism is going to have to kick in and get to the bottom of this, because we're not going to get answers from the mainstream media. They've had their opportunity for this entire year of this multi-million dollar time and resource sucking investigation that's resulting in the nothing burger, and they haven't done their job, and that's a shame that the press, which is supposed to be like the rest, a bulwark of democracy, and is supposed to be able to provide the information to the people. They're not doing that, and there are failures in that department. So citizen journalism, kick in, let's find the answers, and then we have an opportunity to learn from, I think, a huge mistake of this quote-unquote investigation, because look what it's discovered, and we can clean it up then. But, yeah, I believe that these Russians, their goal was chaos. I believe that that people are going to start, believe it or not, linking this to illegal aliens, Rebecca, and bear with me as I explain this. And I heard a couple of people talking about this today, that we're telling illegal aliens, illegal immigrants, people who are here illegally and, involved in our country, but they're not citizens. We're telling them, we're not. The left is telling them, you have every right as an American citizen. You have all our protections. You have our constitutional rights. And for so many of these other countries who are coming in, the joke today was, well, what about these Russians? What's different about them? Can't we say that they, too, have the same rights and the same constitutional protections? I think this is going to open people's eyes to see how inconsistent our politicians and our bureaucrats are, and that gives us opportunity there again to clean things up.
Yeah, you're. That's actually that's rather funny, because look, the so-called dreamers, the illegal immigrants who were brought here as children, and are now adults. They're like protesting in the halls of Congress, demanding things. They're here illegally. They're foreign nationals here illegally, and they're like interfering, you could say, quote unquote, interfering with our political processes, demanding certain things of our government, demanding all sorts of stuff. So the Russians, they were just trying to get involved in our political process as well, I guess, is what you're saying.
Right. Well, and. Yes, the irony in this also is failing to win the election, the 2016 election, not able to hear voters say the status quo has got to go. Well, the herd of leftists, of globalists, they then turn to hijacking the presidency with this concocted collusion, this theory of theirs that they've been chasing, and they've been wanting to find at the end something that could indict Trump. And that's part of their hijacking of the presidency and discrediting him. But, it sounds like the wrong team has been being investigated over Russia. If you think about it, with Hillary's campaign manager, her right-hand man, Podesta, having partnered with Russian oligarchs, right? And remember Russia getting 1/5 of our uranium production under Hillary's State Department. Mm-hmm. And while the Clintons were getting rich, palling around with Putin's pals, all those things that's all okay, but this goes to the top brass, and that's why I agree with the Florida governor, though it's a different case, but calling for resignations, for firing. There's not going to be a change unless the change comes from the top. Their priorities are skewed, and I think the American people aren't going to put up with it.
You know what? All I got to say is amen. Absolutely. And by the way, our buddy, our old pal, Peter Schweitzer, who used to work for Governor Palin along with me, Peter Schweitzer's book, Clinton Cash, was the one that exposed all of this corruption within the Clinton Foundation, the Uranium One deal with the Russians getting. So it's like, this is kind of old home week, with all of these figures involved in this. Governor, I would love, we're going to keep you on. Folks are going to take a quick break, and we're going to come right back to your calls and more with Governor Sarah Palin here on Breitbart News Tonight. And Governor Palin, we have a fan of yours on line one who would like to say something to you, and I was wondering if we could take this call together. Let's take Ray in New Mexico. Ray, welcome to Breitbart News Tonight.
This is an honor. This is great. Love Governor Palin. Jesus. Hey, let me. This is sort of a personnel question, if I may ask, Rebecca. Is there any way that you can put a pink slip in Joel's box and we can keep Sarah? Is there? I'm Joel. Will find work. Don't worry about Joel. He's resourceful. Don't worry about Joel. He's good. But if we can keep Sarah, I mean, is that? Can we? What do you think?
Joel is so jealous, by the way, that he is not here tonight. Joel is a huge fan, and Joel knows the governor very well. He's been a friend of all of ours for some time. In fact, the first time that we met Joel, Governor Palin, was after the tragic shooting that in Arizona with Gabby Giffords. And that was, by the way, Ray, I'm recalling this for you since you brought this up. That was the first time I met Andrew Breitbart also. It was during that time, it was a very troubled time. Our Governor Palin, our PAC, was being falsely implicated in something that had absolutely nothing to do with us. You recall that, Ray? And it was Andrew Breitbart who came offered to help us. He basically contacted me. He said, "Hey, how can I help? And I want to introduce you to one of my really smart friends who's going to help you too. And his name, by the way, is Joel Pollack." And that was how I first met Joel Pollack. So, yeah.
Rebecca, remember that time? I think and hi, Ray, I want to say hi to you. I think that time was our toughest time in this last decade of being out there on a public platform, was that false accusation that we were to blame for the Gabby Gifford shooting. And still to this day, New York Times has still alluded to that and placed blame. And, if it weren't for Breitbart, so much of our defense, just common sense defense, wouldn't have gotten out there, because I was working for Fox News at the time, and I was not allowed to go on the air and defend myself for days. And finally, I bucked management of Fox News. I never even talked about this publicly, but I bucked the management and said, I'll do my own video and I'll post it and I'll explain to people that no, we are not to blame. And my relationship with Fox was never the same after that. And,
that's right. It was just. Yeah, the late Roger Ailes. He was, as I recall, he was just not happy that you basically stole the news out from under him, by doing that. But I had asked him, how many days do we have to go listening to this with no defense articulated at all of may I please go on the air? And he wouldn't let me. So that was a tough time. But but Joe Pollack, what talent. Yeah, it's just a great guy. And you know what? And this is interesting, too, because that whole Gabby Giffords thing, let's just take a moment and pause on that, because Governor, it was one of the worst. I remember that period, and it was just one of the worst moments, and we were felt like we were besieged by people just accusing us falsely, and I know that your heart was just broken too, because you're a mom, you were seeing, watching the people suffering there, and I know that this hits you really hard at home, with that because of you have a big heart. And what was interesting, when we look back, is you have had instances like this again and again, with the media, with just a vicious media that just targets you and your family and just goes after you for these things. And, I look at President Trump right now, the stuff that he faces, and believe me, it's just awful, the fake news crap. But you know what? This is my take. He had connections with other media, figures. He had a lot of money, and he has an organization. When you came on the scene, you were just an ordinary American. Really, you came, your family's very middle class, just ordinary folks. You had risen up from the grassroots as a corruption buster in Alaska, and was elected governor of Alaska. And you did not have a giant megaphone of people in the media that back east, in the establishment media. And so when these people just came at you, it was it was really very scary. It was like being surrounded, and your record. And till this day, I hear people repeat lies. And I'm like, you have no idea that that's completely bogus. How do you feel about this now? I mean, what were the lessons learned?
Well, that's a great question. And I look back on these 10 years and just think how tiny our team was, Rebecca. I mean, I want Americans someday to know what has really gone on so that they will be inspired to be overcomers. Because if you think about it, Rebecca, what our little tiny team went through, and we're still standing, So I say I would do it all over again, and I'll take those hits if I can buffer the hits then that would end up on somebody else's shoulders and in their heart. I'll take them because I just feel like, it's part of my purpose in life, and that's fine. And personally, I don't live by the praise of man, so I know I'm not going to die by their criticism. So whatever they say, I don't care what the critics say, but I do want people to someday know what it is that we faced for all those years, we're still facing. And on a personal level, perhaps if people understood what it does to a family, how it potentially could rip apart a family because everybody has a different idea in how to react to the circumstances around you, and that causes some stress. And, I just thank God every day that I have a strong family, and, we're doing great. But hopefully our team story could inspire people to know that whatever they're facing, the sun will come out tomorrow, and things can get better. It's just a matter of how you're going to react to sometimes horrible, horrible circumstances around you.
It's so true. And that's the thing that I always, that whenever anybody asks me about you, there's a couple of things I always tell them, because that I know. And I always say, well, first off, I say, she has the two things that were the most needed of any politician that we always need, which is courage and conviction and integrity. I should say two things: courage and integrity, also conviction, but courage and integrity. Those three things. And I also say that you were always been a sunny optimist. That was the first thing when I first met you. My first reaction was you were so optimistic and smiling and happy. You're a naturally happy and upbeat person. It's just I'm not going to let these things get me down.
I was the only one in America who thought that Senator McCain and I were going to win the election. That's how Pollyanna optimistic I was.
Exactly. It's that sort of optimism of we're going to do this, we're going to make it happen. And, this is it's part of your life story. It's part of like in Going Rogue, when you were writing Going Rogue, it's one of my favorite parts of Going Rogue is right at the beginning when you talk about how as a teenager your victory winning the Wasilla High victory winning the high school basketball championship, and you guys were like the little team from this little small town, and you were up against the big Anchorage school, and and nobody gave you a prayer, but you were like, we're gonna win, and you guys did,
I had to kind of live up to what I had mouthed off to a reporter early in the season. I remember, of course, after I said, "Oh yeah, we're going to take state," afterwards I'm like, "What did I just say?" And I still suffer from that.
Yeah, we're gonna win. I gotta ask you. One of the things that I loved about Going Rogue, and I bet a lot of people don't know about, is the section in Going Rogue where you explain the budget process and how you reformed the budget process in Alaska. And just an FYI to our listeners, Governor Palin came into office. She was elected on a wave of support because as a corruption buster, she had turned in the chairman of her own Republican Party in Alaska for corruption, and he had to pay the largest fine in the state's history for an ethics violation. And so everybody in Alaska knew her as this is somebody who's got principle who will call out her own party when they're corrupt. And there was a big scandal in Alaska at that time with politicians on the take from the big oil companies. It had to be cleaned up, and Governor Palin beat two former governors that she had to run against in that election, and she beat them both. And she had was totally underfunded, 5-1 or something. And it was just a remarkable story, a remarkable victory. So you get into office and you're like, okay, you're trying to clean up the state that had this massive corruption problem with these politicians in Juneau who are on the take. And tell us about how this budget process started, how they submitted this.
Yeah, well, it started even before my philosophy on budgeting started before state government when I was elected as a city council member. And then as a mayor and city manager, I was just obsessed with line by line every dollar in the budget and prioritizing and thinking how absolutely ridiculous the traditional, conventional way of politicians budgeting where, automatically, 12 months have gone by, so we're craft a new budget, and of course it's going to increase. Nobody ever questions it. Why? Why does it have to increase? So, it was way back then that I would just pour over the numbers. I still love doing that. I just feel like, oh, man, that's what I was created for. I want to dig into the numbers and find the waste and the fraud and get rid of it for people. So, yeah, on a state level, oh, God, yeah.
Do you remember the thing where, do you remember the part, this is my personal favorite part, where your former aide, Meg Stapleton, who's just a great gal, love Meg, shout out to her. Meg Stapleton, you were up late at night, you had your senior staffers with you. Meg Stapleton's on the computer, and you are going through all of these items that these Alaska politicians are asking to be funded, and you're having Meg Google the items because you wanted to make sure that they were not conflicts of interest. You're like, I have to check this stuff out because what if some of them are asking for something that's crooked, that's attached to them, like a payoff or a kickback to their friend. So you were literally going through it bit by bit to try to figure out what the heck are they asking money for. Because they were just throwing these things out at you. And that was one of my favorite anecdotes of it. But then the next year, tell us what happened the next year when you basically said that you guys all need adult supervision. So when they turned in their budget request the next year, they had to go before you as if you were the principal and explain themselves before the very beginning. Tell us about that.
I was shocked that wasn't common practice. I thought, of course, they had to come in and zero-base everything. Zero-based budgeting is the way to do it in government. Again, though, let me go back to even city council days, and that was many, many years ago here in Wasilla, when pouring through budgets, and that was before Google, but, I would research on my own to find out what are all these line items that these city council members are plugging in there for the mayor to approve. I remember seeing one that was with new developments in Wasilla, planned unit developments, all the residents were going to be required to have garbage service where the garbage truck would come into the neighborhood and pick up your garbage, and you would pay them. And this is Alaska. It's like, I mean, even today, Rebecca, Todd did a dump run. You gather up your own stuff and you take it to the dump. You don't necessarily need garbage service. So anyway, I find this line item in the budget, and I'm asking the council member, doesn't it bother you that you're putting this in the budget, hoping that it just slides on through, that everybody would have to have garbage service, and you're the one who owns the garbage company? Isn't that a bit of a conflict? So again, it was way back when that you kind of build your foundation on how you're going to go forward philosophically with spending other people's money.
Yeah, exactly. And you had a story that was great too about like how Mark Bevich, who ended up becoming the senator from Alaska for a brief time, but before, when he was just the mayor of Anchorage, he had requested some funding that was it seemed exorbitant. So you contacted him and you said, hey, do you need this? Or, we're willing to fund this because it's really important. I think it was homeless shelters or something. Like, yeah, we're totally willing to fund this. But, how much money do you need for the program? Do you need this amount or this amount? And he said, oh, no, we don't need it for that year. We just need this amount for this year. You can cut that because we're already covered. And you were like, oh, okay, great. So you did it. And then you said in the book that then suddenly the day that this budget came, your budget came out, Mark Bevich is sending out statements to the press, calling you, denouncing you for cutting this and this, that, and the other thing. This was the thing that he told you you could cut. Was that sort of your first indication of the games that are played about this stuff?
It was crazy games, because I remember the meeting with Mark Begich. It was just Mayor Begich and me in the governor's conference room, and we sat there and we discussed it. And he was very candid and easygoing about it. Yeah, go ahead. So I cut it. And then he had the stories that came out about, just how cold-hearted I was and all this. It included his spokesperson saying that they were shouting and she was, freaking out and all. And I just thought then too, Rebecca, I'm like, okay, is this the way it is? Is this the way it's going to go? And yeah, that's the way it is with so many politicians. They'll say they'll do anything to put themselves in a better light. And that's why people don't really like politicians.
It really is. It's just, this is why we can't get stuff done, is people are just, just being goofy. Governor, it's just so great to talk with you. I got to ask you a couple of more big questions about the issues of the day. First off, we were just discussing budgeting and how you reform the budget process in Alaska. And by the way, you made the largest line item veto cuts in Alaska's history. You cut I think almost $500 million from the budget that was just bloat and gut, pork and all sorts of nonsense that that you just said, we're not paying for this. This is ridiculous. And so I want to ask you now, the GOP, we control both houses of Congress now and the White House. The GOP's last budget was loaded with garbage. It was just a complete, bloated, porked out, just ridiculousess. With kickbacks, all sorts of little crony stuff. Excuse me, pardon my language.
Yeah.
And I got to ask you, what did you think of this? Has the GOP abandoned fiscal conservatism?
Our politicians are jumping off the fiscal conservative planks in our platform, and they're creating this uniparty because the GOP, that it has supported this bloat and, the double standards that now we don't evidently care about debt and deficit, even though we freaked out about them under Obama. Well, our politicians aren't differentiating our party from the Democrat Party, the big spenders. So it is a uniparty that's trying to control everything. And just because our entrenched politicians take the easy route and they ignore the problems like an unsustainable, overwhelming, unchallenged debt, we can't. We cannot take the easy route because this is our solvency, our sovereignty, and our freedom that is at stake. One of my favorite quotes, Rebecca, is Thomas Paine saying, "My day that my child may have peace." So what that what he's saying there is we have to work hard. We have to make the sacrifices. We can't take the easy route, again, just because our politicians are. And we must be willing to do something about the issues that are causing radical change in our country. Remember, Barack Obama promised fundamental transformation of America. The definition alone is radical. A fundamental transformation means you're going to exchange something, replace it with something else, and you fundamentally transform only something that you would have disdain for. So with that promise, and that's still woven into so much of the politics that are going on today, it's a tough fight in front of us, but we have to be willing to tackle the issues that are causing that transformation, that radical change. And as you allude to, it's the exploding budgets, it's the unsustainable debt, it's a weakened military. It's incentivizing illegal immigration with no expectation of assimilation, which is a globalist ideal to devalue citizenship. All these things that we know are changing America. If not us, then who? And if our politicians aren't going to do it, I talk about citizen journalism. Well, I talk about citizen activism, too. We need to be the ones out there educating people and not just sitting back hoping that someone will tackle these issues for us, because they're not. Look at the budget that just passed, and look at the double standards, Rebecca, that we're witnessing right now. I already talked about the debt and deficit. We didn't like it under Obama, but, I guess it's fine. Look at something specific in that budget, Planned Parenthood. Didn't we freak out when Obama and his people, they didn't even question Planned Parenthood and what they were doing and would fully fund it, no problem. We've been told by the Republicans in office that would be no more because it's immoral what they do. They cross so many lines with spending government funds. And yet what did we just do? Just recently.
Just let it go through.
And was there even debate on it, Rebecca?
Nope. Yep.
I don't no.
It's disgusting.
Drives me crazy.
It's disgusting. You know what, Governor, everything you just said there is like you were dropping one truth bomb after another. So true. Now, I know this is something you always said to me, and this is something you taught me, is that a budget is basically a blueprint. It's a matter of prioritizing. And you were not a strict ideologue on anything. You were always willing to make a compromise or to fund something. You were not like, anti the social safety net. You were very much you were a populist before populism was cool. Okay. And, you're conservative populist. And I remember, there's a lot of talk recently about the SHIP program, the Children's Health Care Program. I remember very quietly in 2009, when you got back to Alaska after that campaign, that program needed to be funded in Alaska, and you were always very carefully budgeting in your budget, and you just had set aside the funds for it and made sure that it was budgeted, and just did it. It was like, of course we're going to fund, for children, for the, give them the social safety net. Yeah, no problem. We carefully made the budget. That's one of the reasons why you made those cuts before of all that bloat. I look at this budget, Governor, and I think, I know that also that you were big on infrastructure, on creating those tools that the government can provide the private sector, the things that the government is supposed to do, build the roads, build the infrastructure and all of that. This is what President Trump ran on. But you got to prioritize for it. You got to budget for it. If you're going to have to borrow some money, you got to make sure that you get the project done at the end so that you then build up the revenue. I don't see any of this. Are you worried like I am that we're just wasting money and we're not actually building anything? We're not actually putting in the tools that will help us grow the revenue by, actually grow our economy. Are you worried about that too?
I'm really worried about that. This is making me really nervous that there's too much, it seems, acceptance of the MO there in D.C. with the permanent political class and even in the Republican Party, the entrenched politicians just going along to get along, making their deals. They're part of that power and wealth structure, that apparatus that is in, they want to be in control, and they've been in control until Trump promised to shake that up and say no more, that nobody would own him and his administration and his agenda. But it made me nervous. Yeah, this last go around with the budget that there was not more discussion of what the heck is government's role in our lives and the things that the federal government is doing and wasting money on. Why don't we talk about states having to do their part and then local communities, if they really want something, then you do their part. Why is it that the federal government it's all about growth and bloat, and there's just this assumption that that's what the federal government is there for, is to provide for states and communities and individuals. And our Constitution was crafted to make sure that government didn't infringe and overburden, and that its MO would be growth, like it is now. We're going against our Constitution, and Republicans need to be smarter than that.
You know, Governor, do you think now President Trump got elected by draining the swamp, and you mentioned earlier that there is there is a nullification going on with these investigations, like the Mueller investigation. It's basically like trying almost to delegitimize the voters' choice in President Trump, and undermined him and to jam him up with this stuff. But he was sent there to drain the swamp. Do you think that he ought to just push for a total audit of the federal government, look at all these agencies, what are they doing, and basically start to just cut them, like don't fill these positions anymore, just cut them, deconstruct the entire regulatory state as it has, as it is right now. Just keep going at it. I know he's cut a bunch of regulations. Just keep going. Just start cutting. Don't fill those parts. Do you think we need to just get a giant audit of it?
We have to, because it hasn't been done before. The people, it's their money. It's we, the people, our money that's being spent, and the money that's being printed out of thin air, and the money that we're borrowing from other countries, in some cases, to turn around and give to other countries. I mean, there's just absolutely ridiculous things going on in the federal government. And no, we can't get our arms around what is actually going on because there hasn't been an audit. And yeah, President Trump needs to do that. President Trump he's attacked because he represents an awakening, that the people's movement, where we said the status quo has got to go. We cannot keep going the direction that our country is going and think that we will be sovereign and solvent. So something has to change there. Well, President Trump is the existential threat to that corrupt power and wealth structure that's built to fundamentally transform America. So candidate Trump, he understood that he knew what was at stake in the election. And that's why some of us who jumped on the Trump train early and endorsed him early took hell for doing so. But we recognize that candidate Trump understood what was at stake. Okay, so now he's in office. Now's when things need to kick in, and it should be manifested now, that understanding of what's at stake, and really get to the bottom of some things and start changing it up.
All right. We're almost at the going to news at the top of the hour. We're almost done with our hour with you. I can't believe it went by so quickly. Governor Palin, I've got to ask you really fast. We need that wall, don't we? If you could send a message about the wall, it's like build it. Build, baby, build, right? We got to get that wall, don't we?
That's a good way to put it. Yeah, and that's another promise. Hey, Rebecca, here's another thing about budgeting. When you want to, when the top dog, the top administrator, the CEO of the country decides that we need something, and he's elected on that something, at least partially, and that's the wall, President Trump promising the wall, for him to be having such a heck of a time being able to fund it, you need to consider that a mayor, a governor, a president has access to a lot of money with contingency funds and their own administrative funds and their cabinet members with funds.
So we got to figure it out.
Exactly. Yep. So put it together, build the wall, and let's start protecting our country.
All right, man. Governor Palin, thank you so much for coming on the show this evening. Don't be a stranger. I'm going to hound you some more to come on again because Joel is so jealous that he wasn't here tonight. I know that he wants to be here the next time you come on. Thank you so much. And, by the way, I'll leave you on one final note. ANWIRE, we finally got it open. Isn't that amazing? So,
that is
Governor.
so amazing. amazing.
It is. Governor, please, tell your family we wish them all the best. God bless you, and we're leaving this hour on a Barracuda in your honor, as the former Sarah Barracuda, your nickname. Folks, you are listening to Breitbart News Tonight. Stay with us.